Testing 1, 2, 3. Sorry about that. I don't think my mic was going. Uh, just saying. In short, all that's important right now is next week will be no class. But anyway, yeah, gas is supposed to be going way down. I mean, basically, if you look at the crude oil futures and everything, they plummeted yesterday with the announcement that the there's a deal imminent, and even last night, sometime or yesterday, sometime, several oil tankers made it through the canal, going different parts of the world, and so yeah, but yeah, there's no reason it should have really ever affected our prices, but that's the structure. It was set up long time ago, and long time ago it had some benefits to us because we did buy majority of our oil from places like over there, but we don't buy virtually any of it anymore. Um, okay, we got to Jonah, and where we got to was Jonah wasn't happy. Why was Jonah not happy about everything that had transpired?
I think it had something to do with the people he didn't like.
He didn't like them, yes, and because he didn't like them, why would he be upset about that though?
Didn't get destroyed.
Didn't get destroyed. It's what they deserved, wasn't it? Yeah. And that a lot of times we think about things like that. Well, they really deserve to be annihilated for what they did or who they were. And so it's interesting that that was his sentiments, but in essence, I think most of us sometimes think like that. Uh, you know, uh, uh, when 9/11 took place, and when we knew fairly quickly who had done it, what was the initial reaction that everybody wanted? We need to blow them up, you know, let's annihilate them. And it's one of those things that, of course, a government is not a religious group. So, people make that mistake way too much. They'll criticize, well, if we were, Christians should want the government to pay for immigrants and pay for this and pay for that. And because, the Bible says we're to do this and do that. And where in the Bible does it say government should do what it don't work that way. Government is not a Christian entity, no matter how devout whoever's in there. And I'm not saying that everybody's in the government's devout, far from it. But even if they were, say you had nothing but elders and preachers and elders' wives and stuff in our government right now, that still wouldn't make the government a Christian entity. It just doesn't work that way because it wasn't set up as a Christian entity. God really cares little for how the government's daily type things work. So it's really a mistaken idea that a government should function like a Christian entity. In fact, I think it's been harmful to most churches. Uh, so 100 years ago, someone was in need. Who did they turn to? They lost their job.
Neighbor.
Neighbor. Well, yeah, they could have turned to the neighbor, but who else? Who would you probably first and foremost go to? Family, but then your church. So, if your family didn't have any means, you would go to your church. And what would the church do? Well, the church would help you out. Benevolence used to be a bigger part of church work, and rightfully so, because it's very prominent in Scripture. But then, sometime in the 30s, you got this thing called Social Security. You got things such as uh, even retirement. You got things like, all these things came about. And, you say, well, that was good, but it took that. So, does the government really care for people?
They have Social Security.
Well, people in government may care, but the government doesn't, does it? All government does is functions based on the laws that have been made. So, if there's a bad law that's been made, ain't much you can do with it. Even if it's a good law, you still got all this bureaucracy of trying to make it work. The point is, if someone's in need and they go to their church, and they say, "Hey, I need something." Well, the people there not only will help them, they will help them in a long term way to where it's best for them because they generally love and care for them. And that's the big difference. That's kind of where our society has changed now. 100 years ago, everybody depended on family, depended on churches, and now if you get in trouble, that well, you know, I need unemployment, I need this, I need that, and it's not as good, and it has a dependency to create a class of people that will turn to the government for everything, and government don't have the answers. So uh, anyway, uh, neither here nor there. But a lot of people they don't like even things about there's always debate. Social Security. There's some crowd that says, well, if you make a certain amount of money or you have a certain amount of wealth, you shouldn't be entitled to Social Security. Well, obviously, you paid in Social Security just like anyone else. Why shouldn't you be entitled to it? But there's a lot of people that debate all kinds of silly things like that. And one of the big ones now is, and my kids are a little bit like that. They don't believe there's no reason anyone should be a billionaire. I mean, why? What? Why is that the case? There were rich people in the Bible. I dare say Abraham, if you based wealth on difference between you and a regular person, Abraham was probably a billionaire of his time period. Read about all the things he had, all the possessions he had, all the slaves, all the servants he had, all the livestock he had. He was an extremely wealthy man of his day. You read about other people. Job was an extremely wealthy person. You can go on, and that really doesn't have anything to do anything. Now, some people are blessed more than others, but a lot of people don't understand wealth anyway. They think wealth is gotten through ill-gotten means, and that can be the case, obviously, but most of the time it's not. I mean, most of these people that are ultra wealthy, they came about at the right time, and they had a very ingenious idea, and they're on that next level of being able to apply it, and so they've made a lot of money. Now, the thing that confuses people, if you go up to Elon Musk, and I think he's worth somewhere around $400 billion now, if not more by now, and you say, well, I tell you what, once you give me about once you give me about 100 billion. Well, you know what? He don't probably have 100 billion. Now he could get it, but his wealth is derived from the companies that he owns and the valuation of those companies. So it doesn't work like so. If tomorrow, say those companies really started tanking, his wealth would go down with it. I mean, it's like it doesn't have, and you say, well, if it's me, maybe sell it and make cash out of it. Well, you start doing that, the value of the stock goes down. Like, why is he selling it? And probably a big case of that. Now, I know I don't really care for him much now either, but Bill Gates. So, Bill Gates, for a long time, was the richest man in the world. And it was when he was the largest shareholder of Microsoft. And while he was the largest shareholder of Microsoft, he was the richest man in the world for the most part. At some point when he's getting ready to retire, he starts divesting from Microsoft. And now, don't get me wrong, he's not poor, but he's worth a fraction of what he was worth though when he owned Microsoft, even though nothing's really changed. I mean, his bank accounts probably are actually bigger now than they were then because he's got more disposable income. But the point is, that's how wealth works. So a lot of people really don't understand that. Now, it's not that they don't have a bunch of money. I mean, all they got to do is finagle some things around and come up with a, 100, $200 million to do whatever. But I can't do that. But it's not like they have billions of dollars just sitting in the bank, just counting the money. Um, but a lot of people have preconceived ideas, and uh, so Jonah had idea that they didn't deserve. Now, what's scary about that? What's scary about uh, basing things on they don't deserve it. What's a scary proposition? I knew a guy. He was an elder at the time, and by the way, last I heard he'd fallen away because he eventually couldn't uh, live under his rigidity that he had set for others. But in Robertson County, Tennessee, when I first moved there, and uh, it was for the most part a wet county. In other words, you could buy beer and other things, alcohol, and most of the convenience stores, gas stations, they sold alcohol. And so he had this principle that he would not eat anywhere that served alcohol, and he would not buy anything from any place that served alcohol, i.e., gas stations. He'd go to this small supermarket in town that they didn't do it, although he probably paid a lot more money by doing that. But he would go to a gas station that sold alcohol. And we had in town it was one of these old style gas stations where basically all they did is the gas pumps and maybe had, uh, you know, uh,
Had somebody come out and fill your tank.
well, no, they didn't have that still, but it was just basically they didn't have the convenience type store in there. They had vending machines and they had, stuff like that, but they didn't have any like stuff that you bought inside it. Well, needless to say, at some point we lived there, it went out of business because gas stations don't make a ton of money off of gas. The actual gas stations, they make their money off the stuff they sell while you're there, and so they'll make. I mean, they don't lose money. Don't get me wrong, but they don't make much money because the the gas company, the people that provide the gas, they're the ones that make the money off of gas. The suppliers and all that. But where you get your gas, say at a Casey's or Littlefield, wherever you get it, the actual individual station, they don't make a lot of money off the gas. They make their money off of the stuff you get in there. Like, oh, I'm thirsty. I'll go get me some water. I'll get me this or I'll get me that. That's where they make a bunch of money. Okay, so they don't really survive if all they do is gas. So that place eventually had to close shop because these places that supplement it with these other things, they put that gas price down at the bare lowest price they can sell it, okay, without losing money. And so it makes everybody have to sell gas about the same price. So it went out of business. And so somebody out of fun said, "Well, where are you going to get your gas now?" And he's like, "I don't know." and it bothered him because he had made this condition and he had told others they were sinning because they were getting gas where they sold alcohol and they would eat where they sold alcohol and they do this and then now he's going to have to do that. And so he had a hard time with that because he had condemned people for simply doing whatever because it was cheaper on them, it's more convenient on them, whatever it might be. And then he's having to do that now himself. And it's like, how do you justify that then? And so the point is, we can criticize a lot of people. And if we start judging them based on, well, they don't dress good enough, or they dress too uppity, or they do this, or they do that. I don't like their attitude. I don't like this, and it becomes a bad thing because what do they say when you point your finger at someone? Yeah, three, or you got three point right back at you. Yeah. So the problem is, Romans 3:23. What does it say? All all sin falls short of the glory of God. So the problem is when we start being overly critical. Well, God, they're not worth it. Uh, you know, they don't deserve it.
It's not our judgment.
It's not our judgment, but you start, doing judgment based on, well, they have done this. That once again, eventually it comes back on us because we've done things that we shouldn't as well. And so what happens is if you're basing it solely on the merits of whether you deserve it or not, none of us are going to be deserving. And so Jonah needed a lesson on this. Another thing, we pointed out last week, so we're about 50 years from what happened, Israel being taken into captivity by the Assyrians, same people Jonah sent to preach to. I think God had a little bit of purpose there, don't you? I think there was something there, and it's an interesting history. Eventually, you get the Samaritans, and where New Testament, they're known as Samaritans because some of them got saved, some of them didn't. In fact, they brought some of them back because we'll see when we get there. Uh, so anyway, so what we see is Jonah was unhappy. And in fact, after he went through, he knew, he said, that's why I went away try to get away as far as the good, God, because I know in verse 2 says, he prayed the Lord and said, oh Lord, is it not what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful God, or slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And that's where we stopped last week. He's having a pity party. He's not. God's going to talk to him now. And I love the way God, when he talks to people, and sometimes the best thing you do, he asks Jonah a question. And he says, and the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? What does God mean by that? Do you do well to be angry? Is there any benefit from being angry in his case? Uh, next time you run across somebody and they're just really angry about something, just ask them, does it do you well to be angry? Is it accomplishes anything? Is it actually helping you out any? And usually no. And so I'm sure Jonah was a little puzzled by this, and he had to think about that. It's not really benefiting him any at all. And so Jonah went out, verse 5 says, Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. What does that mean? Made a booth for himself. Yeah, what would we say? Yeah, probably made some type of lean-to or something. Sometimes booths and tabernacles, tents, they become interchangeable as far as what they stand for. So he made them some type of small, cheap shelter on the things that were there. Okay, let's see if any other translation says anything. Booth, booth, shelter. The CEV says shelter, shelter.
The nation of Israel, they were under the law. At least one time of the year, they had like a holiday.
Yeah, feast of booths or tabernacles or tents. Yeah,
so they were used to.
Yeah, so they made it. It was probably wasn't much now because it would have just been stuff that he could have found there. So it was probably kind of like a mini brush arbor. Is probably what it was like. He got some sticks together, something that he could try to get a little cooler. But have you ever, when I was young, I used to like it. I don't think I'd care for it now. Have you ever been tent camping? Tent camping out in a tent.
Yeah.
What's the best time of year to go tent camping? Spring, fall. Sometime when it's cool enough where you can have a fire, it's cool enough that you sleep okay, and that it's not too hot. Now you don't want to go wintertime either because then it gets too cold. But you want it that because it just is what it is. Have you ever been camping in a tent during the hottest part of the summer?
Probably. I can't remember.
It's not not very fun.
and not very fun. So, these modern tents, you got zippers and you got like a screen door thing. You got other places you can let the air, so hopefully if there's a breeze, it'll come through there. But
Sides are rolled up.
yeah, sides rolled up. But when it's 100 degrees
If
outside,
you're close to water and you got shade, you can stay comfortable.
it's
or
better.
close to
It's better.
shade.
But when it's 100 degrees plus and you got a lot of humidity, and say you don't have much of a breeze, uh, it doesn't matter how much you open it up, it's going to be hot. Okay. So, so Jonah made this probably a mini like brush arbor thing where he'd have a little bit, but if it was hot and the sun's shining, uh, it's still going to be hot. Okay. It might be better than otherwise, but it's going to be hot. Uh, uh, and he sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. So, maybe God won't relent, but obviously God is. Says now the Lord God appointed a plant, much like he did with this. He prepared this great fish, and now he's appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. So, like you say now, if you can get in a place there's a lot of shade and trees, and of course, sometimes you get a breeze, and then good enough canopy, and it can not be so bad. Uh, you know, our houses today are built different than they used to be. So, how did they used to build houses? Say early 1900s and before. Where would you put the house to begin with? Hopefully more than one even. You'd put it under the trees, and you would have the windows to where they could easily open, because what did you want? You wanted that breeze to come through, and houses were designed where the breeze would actually go through the house. So houses today, if any house built probably 50s, 60s on, they're built to be totally enclosed, a tomb, you might say. They're not built to where a breeze flows through it. So even in your house now, if say your air conditioner runs out and you open the window, it might have some help, but not really, because the house it made to where a breeze will flow through it anymore. Uh, but that's how it used to be. So uh, anyway, so a shade from a plant like this, I don't know, must have been a big plant, had a lot of foliage, and oh, it was nice. It provided that, and it's a weird sensation. I don't know why it's this way, but so if it's 100 degrees outside and no clouds in the sky and that sun's beating on you, it feels a lot worse than if it's 100 degrees and say maybe it's overcast, and say maybe you're under a shade tree, big shade tree, where the sun can't reach you. It's a kind of I don't know if it's partly in our head, but a lot of it's just because that sun's not hitting our skin directly to where it heats up our body as well. But anyway, so Jonah's happy about this. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm. So he appointed a plant, now he's appointed a worm. Now this worm gets a good job. That attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind. Um, and the sun beat down ahead of Jonah, and he was faint, and he asked that he might die. And he said, "It is better for me to die than to live." Now, so a scorching east wind. Now, I remember when I was in junior high and lived in Salsa, and it was a record heat year that year, and it was hot. But, breeze still was a breeze. Went down to Texas. The air temperature wasn't as bad, but there were times of the year in the summer where the breeze that you would get was worse than no breeze. It was a hot breeze. And I mean, you didn't want to be outside in that hot breeze. It was worse than if it had just been settled. No, none at all. And so This was something like that. It was a hot grease. So it's like being in uh, one of these modern air fryers where it's blowing the fan and the heat at the same time, or being in a dryer, that's circulating hot air. It's just even hotter. And so, he's like, I just want to die. And, it was that hot. Verse 9, but God said to Jonah, do you do well to be angry for the plant? Okay. God has come back full circle. What he started out, do you do well to be angry? Yet he has given him something he's really angry about. He's angry about the plant. Why is he angry about the plant? It's not there anymore. And it says, do you do well to be angry for the plant? And he said, yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. So he's so angry. Yeah, I do well. I'm angry enough to die. In verse 10, and the Lord said, you pity the plant, which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And here is the $1 billion question, as I say. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? Now, so what is God in essence saying to him? To Jonah. So why did he pity the plant? Even though he didn't have anything to do with it, the plant provided something useful. And God said, in essence, are people not worth more than plants if you get down to it? Should God not pity 120,000 people? Who most of them apparently were doing it out of ignorance. Should God not pity us, the jewel of his creation, that we should be redeemed? And so we see that indeed God shows why he's a merciful God. We pity things that we don't have any stake in. Yet God, who created all things, is it not appropriate that he has grace and mercy for his creation? So, we understand the message. Now, what's interesting, some people question who wrote this, but I think it's probably Jonah. Why is that a good thing that it's probably Jonah?
He experienced it.
He experienced it. What about the way this book ends?
What?
What about the way the book ends? How does it end?
Makes a point, and that's it.
That's it. So it makes a point. That's it. So what we don't have, and this is the beauty of Scripture, in my opinion, because there's not another paragraph that says, "And Jonah contemplated this, and he had a change of heart, and he realized that." There's none of that. It's like we want that from our standpoint, but there's none of that, and I think there's none of that because that's the point. There isn't anything you can argue with that, and Jonah's the one that this book is about. He learned a great lesson from this. And, we get bent out of shape on things. We get upset. I've seen people get upset at church on things that have. I know there's some people, and I'm sorry it happened. I mean, I wish we could have. I don't know. There's probably should have been more, but I know there were some people that weren't happy that we didn't wind up having the potluck yesterday, and they didn't hear about it. Well, does it do you well to be angry about it? No one did it intentionally. Yeah, we may have could have done better. But at some point you can't get word out to everybody on that, and so it's a thing that sometimes we fail in perfection. So you could be angry at that, but haven't we all sometimes not done everything we could to
Which
get
like very much like Jonah.
Yeah.
Jonah could have asked questions.
Yeah.
God would have answered it.
Hmm.
But he chose to want to be just judgmental.
Yes. And who was he really judgmental of, by the way? God. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
questioned God.
Questioning God. And so we do that a lot. We do that a lot. And so, sometimes mistakes are made and we can get angry about it. I've seen people get angry at a brother or sister in Christ or other things because of some trivial thing, and they don't ever speak to them again. And it's crazy. Did it do you well to be angry at them? No, you lost a brother or sister that was valuable to you in some way. Sometimes we get mad at our friends because we get angry at this or upset at that. And do you do well to be angry? No, you wind up losing a friend. I mean, it doesn't serve you well to live a life where you're not forgiving and understanding that everybody makes mistakes. What is one of the big themes of the New Testament? How many times we forgive somebody? Basically, there isn't a number. Jesus threw out a number. Instead of the 70, the rabbis had taught a certain number and 7 times, and so Jesus threw out a ridiculous number so that they understand there isn't a number. And so that's our hearts. That's how we should be because that's the way God is. And so we can't be God-like if we're not forgiving of people that do things that aren't always the best. Jonah is an interesting book, and we don't need to lose sight of the fact that the people in Nineveh did change. Another aspect of Jonah not only not liking them wasn't just that they were evil and wicked people. As we've said, what was probably 90% of Israel like during this time? They were evil and wicked people. So it wasn't just that they were evil and wicked. He was a prophet in the northern kingdom, and he regularly talked to people trying to get them to repent and stuff. But what is the difference between people of Israel and the people of Nineveh? What were the people of Israel? Israelites, yeah, it's Hebrews. They were, what about the people of Nineveh? What were they? Well, they were Gentiles. Yeah. So, yeah, they were a different group of people. So a lot of Jonah's unwillingness wasn't just that they were evil and wicked people. It was they were Gentiles. And I think that's important for us to understand because we think the Old Testament is just about the Israelites, but it's not. And we see even in the Old Testament, God wanting to bring in people that are not, the ones that were blood related to Abraham. And that's really what's going on here. It's trying to prepare for a way in the future. And it's why also, even some Jews today, it is a strange phenomenon, I think, that Daniel is not categorized as a prophet. And the only answer to why he's not categorized as a prophet, because his prophecies didn't deal with Israel. It dealt with the things that were going to come after his time. And those things were leading to a kingdom, the church, that wasn't about your physical blood relation. It was about the relation to the blood of Christ. So anyway, so we do see a lot of that. So it's animosity, it cracks me up. It's kind of funny, during football season. In fact, we're going to be in our conference again now, and there's some people around town they won't even say the name Ozark. is the team up north of the river, and and I understand robberies. I don't think they meet it. Some of them meet, but it is true. You look at there are people that if it's a Yankee or if it's a Southerner or if it's and there are people that are still racist today. If it's a black person, they're going to look at them differently than a white person. Um, and even a lot of the mission work, especially in the early days of a lot of mission work, a lot of people didn't want to do it because people were going to, and so that is something that we need to be careful about because Jonah had to be called out on that. God has pity and mercy on all. So, any thoughts, comments? We will go to Amos, but any thoughts about Jonah? Okay, let's just look. We'll kind of do a quick introduction of Amos. By the way, one book, and at some point I kind of looked through it. Obadiah is probably the first of the minor prophets. The second one is actually another one that we did look in, and we're more familiar with it, is Joel. Joel actually took place probably 30 or 40 years before, actually maybe more, maybe 40 or 50 years before Jonah, Hosea, and Amos, which is what we're going to study next. So I like these books because you can actually figure out about when they was written. Amos, for example, it says the words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa. So he was a shepherd in Tekoa. Tekoa was south of Bethlehem. Which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah. That's where we've been at, king of Judah, in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. So, which is interesting. So, whenever this was written or before it's compiled, this is when the prophecy started. But this earthquake was apparently very significant. That area's been known to have earthquakes for a while, and this was a significant one. Even Zechariah talks about it. By the way, earthquakes was one of those things that God's people wasn't supposed to have to go through. Remember when they were taken, they make the covenant with God, and He tells them that won't be facing the plagues or earthquakes or famine and all these other things. But what was the condition based on? Yep. And so they'd had years of not doing that, and so now you start seeing they get a lot of the problems that God told them they wouldn't have to deal with if they just remained faithful. So Amos was lived in the southern kingdom, but yet was a prophet more to the northern kingdom, which is kind of interesting. Most of the ones that are prophets to the northern kingdom actually lived in the northern kingdom, but Amos did not. And so he has prophecies for both of them. I'm just going to read this from it's from Nelson Illustrated Bible. It says, the book of Amos addresses the excessive pursuit of luxury, self-indulgence, and oppression of the poor, which characterized a period of prosperity and success in the northern kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam II. Amos's message of doom seemed incongruent with the elaborate trappings of that era. But with divinely given insight, he saw the corruption beneath the brilliantly colored exterior and announced that the nation was rotten to the core. The book stands as an eloquent witness against those who subordinate human need with dignity to the pursuit of wealth and pleasure. The name Amos is derived from the Hebrew terms meaning lift a burden. Thus, the name means burden or burden bearer. Amos lived up to the meaning of his name by bearing up under his divinely given burden of declaring judgment to rebellious Israel. So, anyway, so that's what Amos is going to be about. So, Amos is written by the So they were wealthy, but yet they were not very good people, and there was a lot of people being underprivileged during those times. So anyway, so Amos talks about that. Now, once again, Amos is less than 50 years from the time. Let's see, Amos is probably this is written probably about 30 years before Israel is going to be destroyed. So why would God have a prophet speak to people that in 30 years they're going to be taken into captivity? What was the purpose? There you go. Now, in like all things, sometimes we tend to assume it's 100% one way or the other. So my guess is there was probably some people that did repent and changed, but it wasn't the majority, and the ones in power still kept doing what they was doing. But yeah, all these are just another opportunity for them to change their ways. Even though a prophet is warning them of what's going to happen, it was an opportunity for Israel to change. They don't change, and we know that. So a lot of the things that he talks about, they do come to pass, but the purpose was that they might change their ways and do better. So if you would like, read the book of Amos. I don't think it's too many chapters, like 6 or something. So let's read the book of Amos, and we'll try to get it in about a reasonable time period. Um, and then we'll get to Hosea. Hosea, actually, of the minor prophets, a lot of people know a little bit about Hosea. Uh, and his wife was it Gomer. Yeah. But anyway, so Hosea is also another one about the same time. And so then we'll go past. We'll go past this section, and we'll get back to the regular stuff. But then we'll get back to some of the prophets. They kind of intertwine. And but it's interesting, I think, that we study the prophets in the time that we've been studying with the kings that they're in, because we know what the status of the kingdom is, both the north and south during this time period, and so that's the case. Now, uh, one of the next prophets we're going to get to after Hosea was going to be Isaiah, and Isaiah is somewhat a contemporary of some of these other prophets, but he goes to a later time with good King Hezekiah. And so we'll see some things. Now, uh, the prophets after, once Isaiah starts and getting his time frame, they're going to all be towards the southern kingdom. Why? What happens to the northern kingdom after they're assimilating? Now, we'll talk about that time period, but uh, basically there's no point prophesying to people that's already gone. So, uh, and so we'll see that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and shut down the stream. And like I say, next week we will not have a class.